Welcome to podcast episode number 4 with the CADyShack team talking about AWS best practices and really developing your partner ship with Amazon and kind of the dark arts in there. So in previous episodes, we covered a lot of things, just getting started, the role of a CAD. We talked a lot about co-sell as a really important bucket. I think Brett said the most important bucket. And we talked about ACE and pipeline, and we talked about marketplace and revenue generating. And of the other two C's, I think we can kind of make this a little bit of a combination because they all feed each other. But really, I think today is to get into co-build and co-market, the other two C's. And so with that, let's just start with the quick definition. So Brett, I'll hand it to you. What is co-build? What does that mean? What does a company have to do to kind of start there? And it's the hardest, I would say, but it's probably the most important thing that AWS looks at these partners to do.
Sure. So, I think it's going to mean a slightly different definition for all of us, and really it might be even kind of shocking for a lot of the other, CADs that are out there. So co-build is not only your solution, right? It's built in the cloud, working to be, there's a lot of definitions, right? An ISV, a digitally native business, we're building your solution out with AWS. It also means integrating into native services and ingesting those things and making sense of them in some capacity. But it also could be, into specific betas, right? So competitive differentiators that, because of your relationship with AWS, is going to make a pretty significant difference in the marketplace with a lot of those competitors. So I got a couple different ideas of what it really means. It definitely is very different in my view of what co-build means today than it was even just a year or 2 years ago. So Barlos, what's your view on that coming from the inside of AWS?
I come from the school of thought of like, you got to break things, right, to make things happen. And co-build to me means something very different than it does to a lot of other people. Even at AWS, when I was there, I felt like me breaking things was the best way to make things happen. So going from, changing the way that you do business and building a new process is what I call co-build. And I think that's what we're doing with CADyShack and other things. But when I'm talking about co-build, I'm talking about building process that is inclusive of AWS products and going to a sales team with a co-building thought process of, we're going to build something together that nobody has done before in our particular region or vertical, and then take that and bring in AWS MBOs for the salespeople, bring in AWS products that are going to tie into these other products, and then bring in other partners and build an entire ecosystem, not just with AWS. AWS might be like 45% of it, but then another 30% being other ISVs, and then the rest of it being how you're interacting with sales teams. So I think co-build is more of like building a community and a process, not just trying to do one or two. So that's what I think co-build is.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty advanced. That's probably really hard to do to get started. In all reality, like if I'm giving someone guidance, the easiest thing to do, AWS, search for competencies, figure out what the competencies are. There's actually a lot more now as they verticalize use cases, industries. There's a lot of other ways. But in many ways, like as a certification, like the easiest thing that we build security platforms, really an integration that we have. If I add value to ECS, EKS, containers, Kubernetes services, guess what? There's a competency for security. There's a competency for containers. That was like the first two things that we did. Like we already have a solution that works, but at Lacework, like I needed to go check those boxes. And that's a huge validation that like the way you submit those competencies, you fill out basically a questionnaire. Someone at AWS, usually one of the SAs or partner SAs comes on, validates, they have to do demos, we have to prove that we do what we say we do. This is how we checked all these boxes. This is how we do security for containers, how we support Fargate, how we support all that stuff. And after that, you get a badge, right? You get a competency. The nice part, and this is where it's going to feed into co-marketing, is with every competency, you also get 10K of MDF added to your piggy bank. And MDF stands for Marketing Development Funds. For service readies, like we did a certification with the processor team, the Graviton team, our agent supports Graviton. We checked all the boxes, passed all the tests, and now you can deploy AWS Graviton instances, and Laceworks agent works and deploys. And it's now in our QA processes in our backend to test that when we develop new versions of our agent. So because of that, just like an Intel processor and AMD processor, same thing, it's compiled correctly, it works, but we check that box, we get that kind of certification, and also we get $5K a year extra for MDF as an example. So I think for many times, like knowing what your SaaS service or your software does, co-build in the very beginning, easy guidance, go check as many competency boxes as you can. They're not easy. You actually have to supply very good internal case studies, externally publicly facing case studies. They're hard to achieve, but like just getting started, I think that's probably step one. Figure out what competencies you can align to, go after those things. And then over time, you're right, you might get invited by those teams into new developments. I mean, we just got off of reInvent. I'm wearing a sweatshirt here. Lacework was part of a bunch of different launches. Like we heard about what AWS was going to deliver in some of these new products like AWS Security Lake before it was generally available. And they asked us, if you're open to it, we're going to do this thing. Are you interested? And we said, yes. And so our engineering team, my SA team, started to build data that we could contort, make it work, and make it go into Security Lake. And so we were part of their launch. So I think after you get into the very beginnings, you start to meet these service teams, you build friends and champions in there. The neat thing is you can also join them and get some marketing out of it and get some visibility out of it. But I think that then staggers. But just to get started, I think just co-build to me was like, what do we integrate with? Can we check the boxes or get the competencies at AWS that validate that we do what we say we do, which also validates to the market. It's on your website, it's on their website. So it kind of looks good. And then the second thing is, over time, you start to develop these relationships with these service owners. And, I think I've said it many times, the power at AWS is in the folks that own quotas. And there's two teams that do, the sales team and the services team.
Yeah,
they own revenue.
Good call.
So that's a secret trick. So just think of how do you get close to those teams, co-sell, co-build. I think that's really important. So sorry, I talked a lot, but I mean, like that's at the basics, that's where I would start.
Yeah, no, good call. And it keeps, I always think that way too. In a lot of the sense of like where you're going with co-build, and it leads into this whole, its own flywheel effect, right? So it leads into, the more you co-build, the more you can co-market, which means the more you can co-sell, which you get more MDF and you get to pick up other opportunities to do more funded by AWS, and they pay it back in different ways. So, it's a different reciprocal motion of putting in the efforts that better your own product and create differentiators out there in the competitive landscape. So I think those are big call outs. It's something we saw a ton of too, not only where I'm at now at Deepwatch, and being invited to those pre-GA opportunities for betas, it's a really unique opportunity. It's inspiring for the organization, and again, it gives you the competitive differentiators. I've seen kind of all sides of it too in the co-build that open up the share screen. Oh yeah. So sorry, I got to pop up there. Hope that's getting recorded. Anyways, but I've seen what that can do to a pretty significant partner, like even like an Alert Logic when those guys did it before. I mean, they were a part of every launch for, the last, 5+ years before. And it really did. It made a significant difference. And it leads into, again, more MDF dollars, which means you're doing more field events and you get to show off the goods that you built together with AWS. And it's a pretty cool thing. Honestly, it's a really inspiring thing to be a part of, right? So it's not just like, I've got a cool tool, but like, hey, we built this together with AWS. So there's a lot of pride that goes into it with our teams. into leaning in with AWS and what the outcomes can really be. And again, that's really part of that flywheel. And you have to take a step back and that's why I always focus on those three things: co-sell, co-build, co-market, because they're all directly tied together. You can't do one thing on one side without it affecting something on the other side. Your marketing obviously is directly tied back into sales. You need more competitive products, so you get into the co-build and so on and so forth, and there the flywheel continues.
But I was going to say too, like, sorry to interrupt, Carlos, but competencies are one. These software things as an example, but even as an SI or a channel partner, right? There's other competencies, like firsthand. There's the MSSP level 1 competency, and so there's if your goal is to help your own company get more revenue, influence more revenue through Amazon's ecosystem, like by getting these check boxes, it further validates your commitment to AWS, but also it's kind of validating that you check all the boxes. You meet the criteria that Amazon has dictated that all vendors that want this certification are there. So I guess maybe just a question like that, MSSP level 1 competency is fairly new, and there's other competencies around that. Like, why'd you guys do that? Like, you didn't have it before you got to Deepwatch. So why did you push on that? How did that have to happen? Who did you have to organize in your company to go from 0 to hero?
Yeah, good call. That those are important things for sure. Like, having, again, those were new differentiators. Not to digress too far, but again, there's so many little things and so many moving parts inside of AWS that I forget about, let's say the security competency. There's also a spiff behind that for AWS sellers. So now it's another way to incentivize AWS sellers in the co-sell. So there's reasons that you want to co-build beyond the traditional, like, or a lot of the surface levels that people expect on those. But for moving that direction, and then going after, let's say, the additional competencies, let's say, what do we look at? Modern compute on top of the level 1 MSSP. Yeah. It took a lot from the CTO down, engineering teams, my AWS experts inside of Deepwatch, a big focus set. It's a lot of people to get organized. And then you have requirements that we got to get that all prettied up and, put marketing's like perfect spray around that to make it look fabulous when it's ready to roll out by, the drop dead timeline, which is usually really short with AWS. That's one of those little tidbits. When you get into those different things for it to be a launch partner opportunity, you don't have a long sell cycle. A long build cycle. It's a sprint. So always be ready for that. But there is a lot, right? Again, it's getting sales ready for it. Sign off from there, ELT to for me, CTO, marketing, being ready to be there. And then can you throw a party together? Can you get a cruise ship and be the launch partner of record for like a reinforce? It's not everybody can do it. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Hey, Barlos, I was going to ask, so either your time at AWS or even your time at ISVs, or even now when you're consulting to a lot of other new ISVs that are asking about how do I get started? How do I become a better partner? Like, this is part of that formula. But again, you might be talking to a CEO or a CRO that's thinking revenue. This is like on their engineering side. So like, how have you planted that seed or kind of explained why this is important, right? This is one of the 3 phases of the game you have to like invest in and be good at.
When I talk to CROs and CEOs about a lot of this, they usually don't understand what I'm talking about when I say co-build. You've actually been a really great person when it comes to stuff like this, and I know that you've got a dedicated tech person that comes in and helps you, and that's something that I would say 90% of most CADs do not have access to a dedicated tech person. I can't tell you when the last time I had access to a dedicated tech person, not from lack of asking. Yeah. But it's so important to have that mindset of those CEOs to change, to have them understand that, this is not just, let me give you 20% of what's going on and business as usual with the rest of the company. As I wrote in that blog or earlier this week, you have to have a body posture that's facing all in on those 3 things: co-build, co-market, co-sell. If you're not, then asking anything from AWS back to you is just ridiculous. Like, you're going to give AWS pennies of your time when you're asking hard-earned, serious dollars back from AWS, but you're not really truly investing. And I think if you're not doing all three of those things, building, marketing, win wires, putting AWS in all kinds of things, and then selling together. If you're not doing that, you're not going to make it. And
Yeah.
I've got some CEOs that have been doing business with AWS for 3 to 6 years, and they don't understand why. Look, I've become ISVA. I have, done all the things, put all my leads into the ACE. My ACE is super clean. I meet with people all the time at AWS. And my question is, well, what are you doing to co-build with AWS?
Yeah.
What are you doing to co-market with AWS? And they're not. And then they don't understand why it's not successful. So to get back to your question, what I tell them is exactly that. You need to start having a body posture facing AWS using the 3 C's.
Yeah, and just a parallel analogy, I use it, but like if you think of the 3 C's that we're talking about, as football, there's like offense, defense, and special teams. So if you're not doing one well, you could probably lose the game. And so you kind of, I would lean co-build is probably the hardest because it does require commitment from your CTO, CEO, might take a little bit harder. What Barlis was kind of indicating, I've done business development in the past. I've also fairly technical. I've been an SE, but I don't write code. One of my requirements when I got hired by my president CRO was actually, I don't need it now, but I'm going to get an engineer that works for me. Right. And I realized that the only way I was going to be successful with these co-build things is I had to partner with our product and engineering team, but in many ways, we kind of had to do it ourselves and keep it outside of product and engineering. And so over the last 3 years, we're getting better in developing kind of the coexistence of like how we might prototype something. And then, hey, look, we got 50, 60 customers using this. Cool. Let's figure out how to make it part of the product. Let's figure out how to roadmap it. But in many ways, when you get to the point where AWS is approaching you on these like ideas, secret launches, things like that, you got like 6 weeks to say yes and write a whole bunch of code sometimes. And that's not a lot of time if you've got product and roadmap. And the other thing, it actually co-build started with me in the marketplace. That's the first thing that you have to figure out. Do I build or buy? How do I integrate whatever it is I'm doing into the marketplace? Like hats off to Tackle. I'm a Tackle customer, happy doing that. But I actually took marketplace out of my engineering CTO and VP of engineering's lap, and I put it kind of into mine by buying something.
Should we charge Tackle for that? They just like, hey,
plug them.
I'm sending you a bill for $500 right now.
Good people. But like, I remember that conversation. My co-founder and CTO, my VP of engineering, and I said, hey, do you mind? Would you help support me? But I'm going to bring, instead of us building and owning the marketplace and me sitting in line with your roadmap, our customers' requirements, sales requirements, like I have an idea, there's a SaaS service, I can pull this out. And that allowed me to actually transact in the marketplace and kind of keep things off the engineering plate. And early on, that was a pretty good idea way that I was like, wow, this is hard. Yeah, if I have to wait in the same line of all my SEs, all of the product, all of the sales teams, all of the roadmap customers, it's going to be really hard to say yes. And I saw this here. I wanted to build an integration to Security Hub. Yes, great idea. Everyone's all in, but no one was doing it and I couldn't do it myself. So when I finally got the opportunity to hire my own SA, first thing, it was done in like a couple of weeks, right? And I could check that box. And then when you're thinking about your superpower and your co-sell story, that becomes part of it. Like, hey, yeah, we kind of compete with GuardDuty. There's some overlap, but there's some overlap with some of these native services. But look, we have an integration with Control Tower, another service. We integrate to Security Hub where we can put our events and centralize. So my co-build story gets tighter to a seller or a customer when the things that overlap, you take from some, you integrate with some others, and your story becomes more partnery than like, hey, we compete with that. You have to rip that thing out in order to use our tool. So that's where the co-build stuff is. You're trying to figure out a couple different areas. I'll give you some other ideas, but I'll park that for an idea or for now. is where
I
we
I
started to
think it's a
like
great idea.
get started.
No, I think it's a great, but that also brings in to, not to segue away, but there's also, when you're talking about co-build, you also have to bring in co-market. And I think that comes in there. I can't tell you how many times that whether it was before I went to AWS, while I was at AWS, or the two companies that I helped get to the next level after AWS, the marketing team, they all want to do what they do best, which is Gartner events and creating these websites or whatever events, specifically wine tastings for CIOs. And that's great and all, but none of it has to do with AWS. And when you start coming in with like, hey, look, we need to start doing summits. We need to start focusing on AWS sales teams, not just AWS customers. All of that thing takes time and effort from a marketing point of view, not just an engineering point of view. And I think that's the same thing that you, as CADs, I think, Megan Buntain said it best at Seek, that, reporting up to a CTO and having that CTO type money on how do we make this product successful, and then creating our own, like, almost marketing team in partners, not just, hey, Gartner, Forrester, and then, whatever else that comes along with it. Also having just as much focus and dedicated focus on having the marketing and the marketing budget just for AWS, I think is just as important. So I think that co-build and co-market and co-sell, of course, they all go hand in hand, but you can't just have co-build, like being integrated to Security Hub and being integrated to Control Tower. If no one knows about it, it's not going to be any big deal.
What do you mean by
basics? Yeah. What does co-market mean? Like why is that the third pillar? Like, just straight beginning, I don't understand anything about this. I'm brand new to the APN, the partner network. Like, what is co-market?
I'll let you talk a little bit, Brett.
Sure. But again, everyone has may have their difference of opinion. Co-market, though, for me is, it's not just the summits and, reinforce and reinvent and things like that. Those are field events, which is, you want to attend, but co-market, right? It's the power. There you go. Look at that.
Oh, look at that.
Nice plug. Very nice plug. So co-market, right? It's similar to the co-sell, right? You're doing it together. Everything is about doing it together. You're building together new products, whether it's your environment on top of AWS together, you're selling with AWS reps together in the co-sell, co-build, you're co-marketing together. Like, we've done some really fun stuff with those guys. Like, I've had plug Mr. Ryan Orsi, big, beautiful man himself, had him come out to the family ranch, and we did a killer fireside chat video together about the better together story of Deepwatch and AWS together, helping customers on their security maturity journey. So, like, it is the better together story. Us alone, we're great on our own, I swear. Deepwatch, I do love me some Deepwatch. AWS, fabulous. It is the master of the universe, but together, man, that is a serious threat, to be reckoned with. And that, in the co-market, again, it's you're doing it together. It's the better together story in the long run.
I think the simplest thing is, if you put yourselves in your partner's shoes, so put yourself in AWS's shoes. Like, every time we talk, this podcast, press releases, webinars, that thing at the ranch, right? Like, we're actually continuing to echo and talk about AWS and how great their services are and their infrastructure. So, like, in many ways, that co-marketing thing, it is a gift. In many ways, they're giving you a resource, money to fund, access, but you're talking about them and you're putting out press releases, you're putting out content. It continues to spiral, like, it benefits them. And so it's kind of how these win-win relationships work is, the gift might be, hey, I got a competency, I got some MDF, I got 10 grand. And so I put my 10 grand with their 10 grand, and I got to do 20 grand worth of content syndication, driving attendance to a webinar. And we got to talk about how great Lacework for security for EKS is, as an example. And so, in the beginning, it's just simple. Yeah.
No, you're right. I was going to say, you're right. You do a couple of those things. You got some MDF. Like, I use my MDF to buy a Ferrari. I actually got to, I rented a Ferrari with my MDF. So there's lots of ways to use it. So I would say
There's a
that's a
big
win.
difference between buying a Ferrari with MDF and
Yeah.
renting a Ferrari with
Yeah.
MDF.
Yeah.
Renting
Oh,
if
You're
that
gonna have
counts.
AWS compliance watching this video
Yeah.
going, what did we approve?
Also,
Yeah,
MDF is like very stringent, like to even get those things approved, like it can't be all alcohol, or if it does, it has to be a meal. Like there's a lot, you can't just do it for gifting, can't do it for credits. Like there's rules on this stuff, but like at its core, it's awesome. Like even with your APN sponsorship fee, you get that stuff back in kind of MDF or credits. And so some of that stuff is great too, to just, I go back in the very beginning. I think Barlas, I'll key in on something you said, which is every software, every business usually knows I've got a CMO or I've got someone in marketing. I'm going to go market to probably drive my own demand generation. And so you're doing your thing, what you know, what you think you know, like what you've done in the past, to just go figure out how to. At least for me in the beginning, a few years ago, we were doing awesome. Like our product is great. We've got a bunch of happy customers. We're talking about cloud security and we're doing we're doing all that stuff. And I was like, do you think it'd be more interesting if we invited like an AWS SA onto this? So it just wasn't like our CTO or our field CTO just talking. It was like now we had two speakers and the banter's a little different. And they're an expert on AWS and we're an expert on Lacework. And like it was interesting because we got more attendance, right? It was different to market because now you're marketing your webinar as an example with AWS and you're totally allowed to brand it and do that. And then you've got a speaker on and they're talking about shared responsibility model and why security and how the cloud and why AWS and like what you're responsible for as a customer. And by the way, we build a great solution to keep you safe. And so that better together story, I think you hit on that, Barlas, but like our early journey, like to me, that was my aha moment. I was like, yeah, we could do all this stuff by ourselves, or we got this new friend, like let's invite them. I think that's probably more interesting and maybe we can generate more business and more, more interest to the content that we're putting out there. Same could be true for blogs, right? Like as an APN partner, the essays are gold on this. Like you can go write blogs with an essay, go publish that, get it on the APN blog. Now it's not, you can drive interest to something that's not on your own website. It's a little less self-serving. A lot of little tricks.
Yeah, like my Ferrari is on the AWS website, actually.
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, what you're saying is exactly what I used to give advice to CEOs back in the day. I tell them, pick a spot in the United States, pick a team and go make them your best friend. And then the second thing is do events, do as many events as you want, but make sure that your product, every product you have has an SA that's assigned to something like that, whether it be security, containers, databases. Find the team that is doing that particular thing and tell them, hey, we're going to talk about AWS Control Tower. Would you like to join us? Because maybe we'll get it wrong if you don't. And maybe you should be there to kind of set us straight. They'll send somebody to be on the blog. And now there is an AWS person there. So now you can use that logo on when you're inviting people out. Like, hey, there is going to be an AWS SA there. So it is an AWS, maybe not sponsored event, but it's definitely an AWS centric event. And then of course that works out really, really well. So that's an easy one to help you co-market. And I like that. And another thing I wanted to say was the difference between co-market and co-sell for me has always been co-market is a one-to-many, whereas a co-sell is a one-to-one. So, and by the one-to-one, I mean from my company to an AWS sales team, who then helps me sell it out to their customers. But co-market is I'm co-marketing it to everybody out in the world with AWS. So it's always been a one-to-many or a one-to-one. So I just wanted to throw that up there.
Yeah, and I showed it earlier, but in case the video wasn't being shared, like when you do this well and you kind of hit on all cylinders, like the true testament to the partnership, again, these aren't free, you pay to play for it, but like when you end up, like I showed, like, this was like a huge thing. So Reinforce 2022, and we got to be the lanyard sponsor. So think about, the neat thing there is just think about now all this branding, the logos on every lanyard for everyone who attends the show. I joke, but like just seeing all my competitors walk up mad at me for like, how am I going to explain this to it's just priceless, right? But I think the point is like that took 3 years of kind of giving, like we've done a lot. We've invested a lot. I have a pretty big team. I've got SAs, I've got other partner development managers globally. Like, hats off. I'll name drop Carol Potts is like a great sales leader at
Hey,
AWS.
Carol.
Like
We
I
love Carol.
will never forget. I had a meeting with her early on, and it's like, hey, like I don't know, but like how do you decide which partners you invest in? And I was expecting like some long, complicated answer, some metrics driven thing. And she's like, honestly, it's the partners that invest in us in the relationship. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of simple. But like what you realize is like the more you're putting into this, eventually and in different facets, I think the more you can expect out of it. And so it is a big investment of time, but truthfully, the co-build stuff, in my opinion, with that C, it's hard, but that's the most probably give, but that shows the most about your investment in the partnership. Granted, a lot of the money and the revenue and kind of a lot of the goodness comes from like the co-sell and marketplace and a lot of those. And then, when we talked about co-sell, here's how I connect co-sell and co-market is when I co-sell a deal, even if it's an AO from Amazon, at best, that might be like an intro, they name dropped us something. They're not selling on our behalf. They're not really like, they're putting in a good, like we still have to do all the work. And so the idea that this partner at AWS is like throwing me business and like transacting deals from that, that's like never going to happen. It doesn't happen, nor would I expect it. So if I want AOs or sourced business as I see it from them, the best way to do that is by MDF and creating top of the funnel activities. And that's where marketing comes in. So what better than taking my 5K of like spend, doubling it with another 5K, or in Brett's case, renting Ferraris, but like that's really on us.
Buying Ferraris.
That's really on us to go like generate this top of the funnel stuff that then I can go put into ACE, or at least it's warm and fuzzy, but like as it qualifies more. And that's where you can kind of connect co-sell. And so in many ways, I don't want to be trapped. I don't think most people want to be trapped under like sourced or AO goals at your own company, because it's really hard, unnatural, or unpredictable. I think I've said that a couple times, but they're giving you money, access, resources to go do your own marketing and to do your own top of the funnel, revenue generating activities. And that kind of spins the flywheel. And actually, AWS calls this a flywheel. So in many ways, like that's the gift you get: MDF, access, visibility, launches. All of that is to help feed kind of your top of the funnel and hopefully make you more revenue. Also, not dummies, most of our solutions are built on AWS. So with more customers, a lot of times equals more spend, and they call that the dual flywheel. And ironically enough, it's reciprocal. So it helps us as an ISV built on AWS, but also generates Amazon more money. So that's why it's kind of all part of the ecosystem, and it all makes sense. So hopefully we connected some of these things together. Any other thoughts on the co-build, co-market, co-sell? I think we hit the big 3 C's, and that's probably, we can talk about more advanced things in upcoming podcasts, but, at least stuff that resonates with you guys.
Yeah, I think it resonates. One question, and bring it back to the beginning of the call, and it's not going to take long to talk about, but you got 2 competencies. I know from talking to a bunch of folks about competencies out there in the startup world, the problem isn't that they don't know about it. The problem is it just seems like a daunting task. You're like, oh, competencies, what am I going to do with that? And people start asking questions of AWS, and they're like, oh, it's going to take you like 3 or 4 months, dedicated person talking about competencies. And it's just not that. Can you maybe give us a little bit of a walkthrough of just your 2 competencies real quick that you have, the container and security? Yep. And just, because I can tell you, I just had this conversation yesterday with a CRO about competencies, and his scare was that it's going to take too long, and he has to have dedicated staff doing it.
So again, this has to align to what you're doing. So if you're already selling to one of these verticals, like maybe you build a software for manufacturing, like you mentioned Megan as an example. I think that's what Seek does. So like you want to prove that you have technology that meets the buyers and that industry. And I think that's one way. For us, we build security software, and we also build software for containerized workloads. And so there's a containers certification or competency. Why you would do this is because, in many ways, the more I show up, on AWS's website, hey, look, there you go, there's Lacework. Like, why do I want that? Well, one is because before I was here, there was just a bunch of competitors that had this competency and I wasn't there. So call it the fear of missing out. Like, I don't want them to be the only ones that are certified here. But the flip side of that is then in the APN, like on the other link where you click software, it'll take you there and it'll take you to the guide. And it says, if you want this competency, A, B, C, D, like you have to fill out spreadsheets. There's a whole bunch of check boxes with a lot of the competencies. There's case studies. So you need to public, to private, like it walks you through everything that you need to do. And it's not easy, but like I said, we're already doing it. My competitors are already there. You kind of have to. Plus, Amazon's telling you that's important to the relationship, and it's the way that they measure the value of our partnership and your commitment. You want stuff from us, we want stuff from you. Like it's kind of the reciprocation. So, I would say at least like what we did with containers, security. I'm actually submitted and going through my DevOps stuff right now. Like that's just because that's what we do. We can check those boxes. We fit into those categories, but the other ones, the industry ones, like we sell infrastructure security. Like we've got customers in healthcare, banking, but like, are we really like a centric app like that? So like the healthcare competency, we can probably check. I'm pretty close to like needing, but also, do I need it right this second? If I know what it needs and I know where I am, I don't know, maybe I just need like one more public case study that from a healthcare company that checks these boxes, and then I can fill out the scorecard and submit it. Well, I just keep that in the back of my head, and maybe it happens in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or maybe I start asking or seeing our wins, go asking our sales team, hey, we just did a deal with this healthcare company. Do you think they'd be open to doing a case study or like whatever it is? And then you're trying to figure out how to go get to that goal that you want, but you're starting from where you are. So everything doesn't happen in a flash. I think the story that I said with the SA on the team that reports to me, I have a couple of them, but I knew I wanted it and I needed it, but I also knew my CEO wasn't going to snap his fingers and say like, yeah, go hire a team of 10 right now, day one. No, we had to like start and build. It was a team of one. It was me, right? And then I added one person and then 2 people and then 3 people, because over time you hit scale, you need, your operational excellence, you need, and all of those things, you just have to have this very long vision for kind of where you're headed. And you just start small, start checking those boxes. That's probably the best advice I can give.
I like it. All right, guys, we're coming up on
Yep.
time. Anything else you want to add?
No, I was just going to say, like, we're not fresh off, but like reInvent, huge Amazon show, end of the year. Barless was there. If you find his little Buddy the Elf outfit,
with it burned into your eyes for the rest of your life.
What, you guys don't like seeing me in yellow tights? Come on,
large man in stretchy pants.
There's nothing wrong with stretchy pants. They were very comfortable, by the way, except I got to admit that those were so cheap. The tights were so cheap that the crotch kind of opened up a little bit. There's a hole. And so when I was going down the Datadog 100-foot slide, I had to keep my legs together because they take pictures of you right when you're coming in. So that was fun.
You're pretty bashful anyway as a person. So
yes, I am. I am very bashful.
But maybe I was just going to say, like, that's the end of the year. That's the biggest show for AWS. Obviously, there's Reinforce, there's the summits. Like, we'll come up onto all of those things next year. But like anything kind of new or exciting, or there was a lot of people. Like, that was interesting to me. There was just a lot of people. It's kind of was almost back in full force. But like, what did you get from it? What are you kind of seeing as it pertains to just AWS, the partner network, like kind of the sentiment of everyone who was there?
It was a lot, man. There was compared to the year before, it was, the year before it looked like it was empty. Felt like I was at the before they opened the doors, when people were just walking around before the doors open. That's the way all of reInvent was last year. But this year, it felt like there was you couldn't even find a space to sit down. It shows that the market is coming back. Like, it's not it's not quite what the analysts are saying when it comes to tech companies have no money and everyone's getting fired. Apparently they have enough money to pay for a $1,700 ticket and a $2,000 hotel bill and hang out in Vegas. So it was nice to see that tech isn't as bad as everyone is making it out to be. And then it was also nice to see that, Datadog stepped up to the plate this year and took on not only the airport, all of the airport was covered with Datadog, but then everything said Datadog on it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. That,
And MDF rule, you can't use any MDF at AWS events. So that's all coming straight out of pocket.
They came out of like the woodwork with that slide. I mean, who comes up with 100-foot slide going down an escalator? Like that is the kind of stuff that I love to see, is that creativity. Or did you guys go down to the basement and see the guy that was the AIML rap songs that go back and forth with each other?
No.
You didn't see that?
No.
So they had one AIML robot on one side on a screen and another AIML robot on this screen, and they would just spout off rap lyrics at each other. I have a video of it. I'll send it to you. And one's like, "My harsh is mellowed by the way that you're speaking to me. And one day I'm going to get some women and they're going to look better than you." And the next guy's like, "You can't get women because your face looks like a horse. When that horse is eating, it is disgusting." And it was just going back and forth. It was just going back and forth, and it was just awesome to watch, right? But I have a video of it. I'll send it out.
But maybe I was going to say the show floor was packed. The events were good. It going last year, this year for sure, like very much a little bit back to normal. I think that was nice. Keynotes were great. Ruba had a great keynote on partners, the commitment of partners. Chris Cruz, like I thought all of that was, as someone who's in the AWS ecosystem, watching the kind of partners and getting that kind of, call out, I thought was really interesting.
I think next year we should have our own podcast in the table, like the way that CDN does it. We should go get our own table.
The Cube
talking live.
Yeah,
me dressed up as Santa Claus this year. I'll get an upgrade. Brett can be the angry elf from when they were writing the Christmas story.
Hey, just a plug though, as CADyShack, you got space in the AWS booth to talk about partners and
we were there all week, and we were doing more talking. Not that there was anything wrong with the PDMs, but they were really enjoying us being a third party sitting in their booth and validating everything that they were saying, and people were listening. They were, the PDMs were saying the exact same things that I was saying, but I had like almost a line of people waiting to talk to me because they wanted to hear from a third party. Like, is this really true? Like, does an EDP really help my partner journey, or does it help AWS make more money? Like, these are questions that people want to know. So I'm glad that we could answer them.
Yeah. Brett, anything from the outside? I know you couldn't attend this year, but like, I'm sure you saw a lot of the content. Just how was that for you? Just kind of hearing from your peers or seeing a lot of the content.
I knew you were going to rub it in that I couldn't go, but
That's okay.
But no, I heard number one thing I heard, actually number one, top three, right? So number one, there was a crap load of people there. Number two, everyone got the flu, and then number three, everyone loved Ruben's talk. So so
everyone did get corona, including my wife. So
yeah, everybody got something, herpes or mix of all the above, whatever it might be. I don't know, but
so it doesn't all stay in Vegas. What happens there?
No, sometimes you regift. You can regift. Yeah. But I would actually say, like Barlos mentioned too, that was one of the sentiments from a lot of the people I talked to coming from there. They said it was just great to see that many people out and about and spending money, and felt very positive about the economy, especially for IT. So, and I mean, like you mentioned, there was probably, I think they were even worried last year that they wouldn't have enough people attending to even have reInvent. So, to break, what was it? Probably, I don't know, 18, 20 plus thousand that time, and to be over 60 or something crazy like that this time is it's incredible.
I think
really,
officially they said like 55,000, but it felt very busy. Like, it was a lot of people for sure. All the parties were pretty well attended. I think.
Well, last year they were at 8,000 people 2 weeks before reInvent.
Yeah.
And then magically it hit 25,000 a week and a half later. But that was the max, 25,000 last year.
Yeah, half the badges look like Amazonian badges. Just saying, but I'm glad that was brought. Everything, all the feedback I got was great. It was a good conference. I'm excited about going to it next year. I won't miss that one.
Yeah,
cool. Well, that's all I got.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're just kind of talking it out, but I mean, we can kind of bring this show to a wrap. That's episode number 4. If you enjoyed it, subscribe, click the like button. I think it helps all the algorithms if you're on YouTube or any of the other stations you're picking this up. But certainly happy to share this with you. Have any questions, ask us. If you want us to talk about a particular subject in the future, like put in the comments and we'll address it. So thanks again. Thank you, Brett.
Guys.
Thank you, Barlos.
Thanks.